Shadow the Demon. Part 1. Shadow of Evil, Gotham City, New Jersey. Wednesday, July 16th, 2003. It was a typical summer night in Gotham City, and the dynamic duo, Batman and Robin, were hauling two badly beaten criminals to a light pole. They tied the criminals to a light pole with zip ties, and then Batman says to Robin,
"I'll call Captain Arnold to have his men pick up these two clowns in the Batmobile."
Then Batman grabs his Batmobile remote and speaks into it, saying,
"Come."
The Batmobile, responding to the command, starts up and goes into autopilot and drives towards where Batman called it. As Batman and Robin were waiting, one of the criminals that was tied to the light pole says to Batman, "You know, Batman, you think you beat us, but you didn't. Wait till Daka gets his hand on you, then you'll be sorry." Then the other criminal chimes in saying, "Yeah, when Dr. Daka finds out, then you're gonna really be sorry," he says to Batman. Finally, the Batmobile pulls up, and Batman and Robin go towards it, get in the Batmobile, and drive off. As Batman was driving off, he grabs the cell phone and makes a call to the 8th Precinct Police Station and tells the operator to tell Captain Arnold that he left him a present on the corner of Westbury and Vineland Street. After Batman hangs up the phone, then he takes off his cowl while Robin takes off his mask, and the two guys smile at each other. The night was over and they were just happy to head home. Well, at the 8th Precinct Police Station, the secretary comes in saying to Captain Arnold, "Captain Arnold, sir, we got an anonymous tip, more than likely from Batman, saying he left you a present on Westbury and Vineland Street." The middle-aged police captain says to the secretary, "Oh, great. All right, let's go see what he left us." On his way out, he calls on two officers to come with him. Later, they pull up to the street corner where Batman left the two tied goons at. Captain Arnold walks up to the two tied men, and he sees that one of them had a note pinned to him. He pulls off the note and reads it out loud in front of his two police officers. The note read, "Dear Captain Arnold, you'll find that these are the last remaining members of the Collins gang. Signed, the Batman." Then Captain Arnold crumples the note and tells his officers to free the men, arrest them, and take them in to the station. The officers then proceed to do it. The next day, it was 11 o'clock in the morning, and Bruce and Dick were on their way to the Gotham Research Institute for Cancer, a privately funded cancer research institute in Gotham City that was run by Bruce's girlfriend, Linda Page, and founded by her uncle, Dr. Martin Page, and several other scientists. Well, Bruce's gold Ford Explorer SUV eventually pulls up in front of the institute, and the two men get out. They make their way up to Linda's office, where she proceeds to greet them, and she says to Bruce, "Well, I'm glad you're on time, Bruce. You know how important this day is for me. My uncle's finally getting out of jail." And Bruce says to Linda, "Oh, I understand. And I want to see this joyous moment. Your uncle was wrongfully accused for a crime he never committed," he says to her. Then Linda turns to talk to Dick to congratulate him, saying, "Well, Dick, I heard a congratulations are in order. I heard you're skipping a grade." And Dick says to her, "Yeah, I am. I'm skipping 10th grade, and I start 11th grade in September," he says to her. And Bruce says, "Yeah, I'm very proud of him." Then Linda looks at her watch and she says, "Oh, look what time it is. Come on, we gotta go pick up my uncle." So all three of them left the institution, got into Bruce's Explorer, and then they headed out to Blackgate Prison. Well, meanwhile, at Blackgate Prison, Dr. Martin Page was finally being let out after 12 years. He was supposed to do a life sentence, but thanks to recent evidence that was unearthed, his name was clear. Well, now he was out of the prison, waiting for his niece and her new boyfriend to pick him up. He was wearing the clothes that he went into prison with 12 years ago. They were a little tighter on him as he put on a little weight while he was in jail. As he was waiting, unbeknownst to him, in a Chevy Suburban that was parked a little ways away, a group of men were observing him. One of the men was a man with sandy blonde hair that was thinning and a mustache. He was sitting in the back seat of the SUV waiting for Dr. Page to be released. As soon as he saw Page was let out, he leans forward on the seat and says, "There he is, my old cellmate Dr. Martin Page. Alright guys, let's go." Soon, the silver Chevy Suburban pulls right up to the front gate of the prison, and Martin was wondering who they were, as he was told that the vehicle that was picking him up was a gold Ford Explorer. Suddenly, out of the rear of the SUV steps out the mustached man, and Dr. Page recognized him, saying, "Well, Henry Foster, how are you doing? What brings you over here?" The man, now identified as Foster, says, "Well, Martin, my friend, I came here because your niece asked me to. She got tied up in some very important business that she couldn't break away from at the institution." And then Dr. Martin says to him, "I understand." Foster then invites him into the Suburban, and he gets in there. Soon as Martin Page was in there, then Foster and the rest of the men get into the Suburban and drive off. As they were heading towards the bridge that led off to the island where Blackgate Prison was located on, they drove right past Bruce Wayne's gold Explorer. Of course, Dr. Page saw his niece in the back seat, and his niece noticed him too, and he says aloud to Foster, "Hey, Henry, that was my niece, and she's in the same vehicle she told me she was going to pick me up in." And then Henry looks at Martin, and he says, "Dr. Martin Page, my old friend, I was not sent by your niece. I was sent by somebody else, somebody important." And Martin says, "Let me out at once." And then Henry pulls out a gun, and he says to Martin, "Now, Dr. Page, please calm down. I really like you, and remember who was the one that protected you while you were in prison." And Martin says to Henry, "But you don't repay a favor by kidnapping." And then Henry says, "Listen to me, Dr. Page. I'm not really kidnapping you. I'm repaying a favor by taking you to somebody who needs a man of your skill and will pay you very handsomely to work for him." While in Bruce's Ford Explorer, Linda quickly screamed at him to turn around and follow those guys that had her uncle. Bruce did that, and soon he caught up to the silver Suburban. While in the silver Suburban, the driver says to Foster, "Hey Foster, that gold Explorer's catching up to us." And then Foster screams at the driver, "Well, what are you waiting for? Isn't the engine in this thing modified? Floor it!" And soon a high-speed chase was occurring on the bridge that was exiting Blackgate Island towards Gotham. Of course, the Suburban, having a modified engine, was starting to outrun the Explorer. As they finally got on to downtown Gotham Island, the driver of the Suburban begins weaving in and out of traffic, trying to cause cars to lose control, and they did, and they almost collided with each other, but they didn't. But it did cause a minor traffic jam. And as Bruce was coming in high speed trying to get them, he saw the jam and he was forced to slam his brakes. Bruce asked everybody in the vehicle if they were okay. Everybody said yes, while the driver in the silver Suburban slowed down. He turns to Foster and he says, "Well, Foster, I think we lost him, but to be on the safe side, it's time to make some changes." And then the driver reaches for the dashboard, and there on the dashboard was 3 switches. He flicks the first switch, and the windows of the SUV polarize and become dark. Then he hits the second switch, and the license plate rotate. And then the third switch caused the entire SUV paint color to change from silver to white. Then the driver made a U-turn, and as he was driving, Bruce Wayne's Explorer drives right by them without even batting an eye. All the men in the SUV laugh, and then they head to their destination. While in Bruce's Explorer, Bruce tells a very distraught Linda Page, "Linda, I think we lost them." Meanwhile, in a section of Gotham City called Little Tokyo, this section of Gotham City was settled by Japanese immigrants long ago, and it's a very unique place to visit in the city, where you do see signs in Japanese and you think you stepped onto the streets of Tokyo. But deep within this section of the city lays a small sideshow attraction called the Cave of Horrors. This sideshow attraction was no different from the ones that you found out in the boardwalks, but it did seem very out of place within Little Tokyo. Well, the men who got Dr. Page arrived to the Cave of Horrors as they were waiting in line. Ahead at the entry was an old-fashioned carnival barker, and he was saying, step right up to the Cave of Horrors. Are you brave enough to face what evil's lurking there? Well, as the man who got Dr. Page got up to the front of the line, the barker's like, gentlemen, welcome. And no one had noticed that he didn't charge them the $5 fee for the ride. Soon an empty cart pulls up, and the barker opens the cart, and all of the men, along with Dr. Page, get in, and he shuts the cart, and the cart goes. As the cart goes into the Cave of Horrors, there were many gruesome displays in the cave. Finally, they reach what looked like a stopping point as the cart stopped by one display. Foster then opens the door to the cart, and he gets off with the rest of the men and Dr. Page. Soon they go up to the display, and there they go to one of the walls in the display, and Foster takes his hand and puts it against the wall. Suddenly, Dr. Page sees that the wall glowed with a light. It was some sort of hand scanner, and it was scanning Foster's hand. After it scanned Foster's hand, then a hidden door opened in the display, and all the men go in. They finally arrive to a secret room in the Cave of Horrors. It was some sort of hideout, and it was beautifully decorated in Japanese artwork and furniture. In the center of the room was a giant conference table, and there were several men sitting in the conference table, and at the very head of the table was a middle-aged Japanese man of about mid-50s and salt and pepper hair. He was surrounded by a control panel in front of him, and behind him was a giant Buddha statue. And then the Japanese man rises from his chair and greets Dr. Page, and he says, good afternoon, Dr. Page. My name is Dr. Tito Daka. I am a scientist, and I'm also a member of one of the biggest criminal empires that the world has probably never heard of. And Dr. Page angrily says, what, the Yakuza? Everyone's heard of the Yakuza. And Dr. Daka says to Dr. Page, oh no, Dr. Page, not the Yakuza. I did work for them a long time ago, but this organization recognized my talents and allowed me to use my talents to further their goals, and that's how I became the number 6 man within this organization. And then Daka says to Page, this organization is called the Society of Shadows. Very few people know of its existence. And Daka goes on to explain further to Dr. Page. And Dr. Page, a man like you will go far in this organization. We need a man of your skill. You're a very talented virologist and biochemist. And just like the men in this room, you also were betrayed by the government, he goes on to say. And then he begins to introduce Dr. Page to the other men that were sitting around the conference table. And he says, let me introduce you here to this man, Mr. Fletcher. He was a very talented architect, but unfortunately his buildings were not up to code. And then he goes on to introduce the other guys on the conference table, saying, and these men are Mr. Marshall, Mr. Preston, and Mr. Wallace. And just like you, they all were brilliant men who were accused of a crime and betrayed by the government. And then Dr. Page says, yes, I was accused of a crime, and yes, I did do 12 years, but I'm not a criminal, and that's why I'm released, because they found out that I was innocent. And Daka says to Dr. Page, forget it, Dr. Page, and what are you going to do? You're going to go back to your old life? Your old life is gone. Society does not forgive men with criminal pasts, no matter if they've served their time or been declared innocent. And what are you going to do? Go back to running the Foundation? The Foundation is being run perfectly fine by your niece. Or going to try to get another government job? Forget it. The government won't touch you with a 10-foot pole. You have no choice, Dr. Page. You could join the Society of Shadows, where your talents will allow you to live like a king, or I might be forced to take more drastic measures, says Dr. Daka, threatening Dr. Page. Then Dr. Daka walks back over to the far end of the conference table and reaches for a button on his control panel and presses it. Soon, a hidden door behind one of the panels opens up, and a man comes walking out. Dr. Page's eyes light up. He recognized the man, and he says, "Bob!" But Dr. Page noticed something was wrong with his friend Bob. Bob had a pale, expressionless look in his face, and his eyes were blank, like he was not there. And Dr. Daka says to Dr. Page, "Your friend here, Bob, was our first choice, but like you, he didn't want to cooperate, so I had to take drastic measures," he says to Dr. Page. And he goes on to explain what he did to Bob. And he says to Dr. Page, "See, I have perfected a new method of lobotomization over the years, and now Bob is pretty much a zombie. He has no emotions. He has pretty much no free thought or free will. He does what he's told. And he doesn't feel physical pain anymore," he says. And realizing he forgot something, Daka says, "Oh, and I forgot to mention, I made some alterations to his brain chemistry, so now he has the strength of a madman." And then Foster says to Dr. Page, "Dr. Page, old buddy, I suggest you do what he says. I've seen the process. Once he zombifies you, there's no turning back." Dr. Daka lets out a big smile and he asks Dr. Page again, "So what's your answer, Dr. Page?" And Dr. Page says to Daka, "No." And then Daka says to Dr. Page, "Okay, that was the answer I was expecting, but I can't destroy your brilliant mind yet. I still need it." And then Daka says to Foster, "Foster, take him down to the electronic lab." And then Daka presses another button on the control panel, and then a door to the left of the conference table opens up, and two more zombies emerge. Well, the men quickly dragged Dr. Page down to the electronic lab, and there they strapped Dr. Page onto a chair. And then Dr. Daka comes down, and then he opens a box with a syringe and a vial of liquid. He sticks the syringe into the vial and fills up the syringe, and he says to Dr. Page, "This is truth serum, and this is not sodium pentothal truth serum. This is a special concoction of mine. It's fast acting, and you'll start telling me everything I need to know." And then Dr. Daka injects Dr. Page with the truth serum. And sure enough, as he said, the truth serum quickly acted. And then he asked Dr. Page some questions. And he says, "Dr. Page, where is the radium within the institution?" And then Dr. Page says, "Institution, radium, in Dr. Boren's office behind a picture." And then Daka says, "Excellent," and he tells the men to take away Dr. Page and to lock him up in the holding cell. After they do that, then Dr. Foster asks Dr. Daka, "So, Dr. Daka, why do you need radium?" And then Dr. Daka says to Foster, "Well, I need it for a weapon I have been working on." And then he tells his two zombies in the lab to go and get the block for demonstration. As the zombies were doing that, Daka walks to the far end of the laboratory, and from a box he pulls out a weird-looking ray gun, and he says to the men in the room, "Gentlemen, this is my neutron gun." And one of the guys in the room says, "Well, that sounds kind of hokey, Dr. Daka." And then Dr. Daka says, "Oh, it's not hokey once you see it in action." Soon the zombies return to the room with a small concrete wall, and they put it down in the lab. And then Daka begins to tell the guys how the gun works, saying, "I'm not going to bore you guys with all the details on what nuclear fission is or the mechanics of this gun, but he says this gun fires a very powerful concentrated beam of neutrons, which will destroy any target through the process of fission." And then he goes on to explain further, saying, and I need the radium as the power source for this gun. It's the only power source powerful enough to generate the energy for this gun. And then he points the neutron gun to the small concrete wall, saying, gentlemen, look what it will do to this concrete wall. He then pulls a trigger, and soon a beam of neutrons hit the concrete wall, and there was a small explosion. The men were amazed, and Dr. Daka tells Foster to pick up a piece of the concrete wall. Soon, Foster walks over, picks up a big piece of craggy concrete, and he was amazed as it dissolved into powder in his hand, saying, my God, this thing is powerful. And Dr. Daka says yes, and he'll use it to break into the safe tonight at the institution. Foster and the rest of the men acknowledge. Meanwhile, back at Wayne Manor, Bruce Wayne managed to calm down the distraught Linda Page, and he says to her, listen, Linda, the police are on it, and if they'll find your uncle, they'll find him. And she says to Bruce, I guess you're right, Bruce. And then she asks Bruce to take her back to the institution, and Bruce says, okay. And then Linda says, before we leave, Bruce, I gotta use your bathroom. And Bruce says, okay, you know where it's at. Then, after she left for the bathroom, Bruce says to Dick, alright, Dick, you know what to do. Head down to the cave, see if you can get into the prison's CCTV system, and identify the guy that took Dr. Page. Dick says, okay, and then he runs off. Soon, Linda was back downstairs, and the two of them left. 30 minutes later, Bruce drops Linda off at the institution, and Bruce says to Linda, Linda, remember, if you hear anything, please call me. Linda says, okay, and she says to Bruce, I'll be here late tonight, she says. And Bruce says, okay, and then he drives off. Later, he arrives back at Wayne Manor and heads down to the cave. There, he sees Dick at the back computer, and Dick says, hey, Bruce, I found the guy that took Dr. Page. And then he shows a picture of him on the back computer, and he says to Bruce, his name is Henry Foster. This guy has a huge list of priors, a career criminal. If you name a crime boss or a gang, he's worked for them. And then Bruce asks him, does the computer list any distinguishing features of him? And Dick says, yeah, the computer lists that he has a scar on top of his right hand. Bruce says, okay, and then he says to Dick, well, I'm going to go fuel up the Batmobile. Tonight we're going to stake out the Research Institute. And then Dick's like, why? And then Bruce says, well, I have a hunch that the guys that took Linda's uncle may be coming for her tonight. It's just a precautionary measure, said Bruce. And Dick asks Bruce, how do you know she's going to be at the Institute tonight? And Bruce says to Dick, she told me she was working late tonight. Well, later on that night, Foster and another man were in a car driving down to the Research Institute. In the back seat of the car was a zombie, and the man that was on the passenger side says to Foster, hey Foster, I don't like having one of these zombies behind us. And Foster says to the man, it's okay. It's gonna prove useful just in case we have an unexpected problem tonight. Sure enough, outside the institution, a old white 40 Econoline van pulls up, and the back door opens and several men come stepping out of it. Then across the street pulls up Foster's car. He steps out of it with the unnamed man and the zombie, and then he goes over to where the guys just got out of the van, and he says, okay fellas, let's go and let's make this quick. So they break into the Research Institute, and as they broke in, their actions go noticed to Batman, who was pulling up in the Batmobile. And Robin says to Batman,
hey look, that's Foster!
And Batman says,
Indeed it is. We just got here on time. Let me pull the Batmobile to a more secured location, and we'll get in through the roof.
Then Batman proceeds to park the Batmobile in a hidden location, and him and Robin get out of the Batmobile, run over to the fire escape, and use the fire escape to climb to the roof. Meanwhile, in the research building, Foster and his men make it over to Dr. Boring's office. They looked around the office until they found the picture that had the safe hidden behind it. Then Foster was about to use a neutron gun on the safe when, at that moment, Linda comes into Dr. Boring's office saying, "Dr. Boring, are you here? I have some questions to ask you on those serum samples." Suddenly, Linda had saw the men in there. She was about to let out a scream before they covered her mouth and then dragged her away and locked her in the closet. Once she was secured, Foster points the neutron gun to the safe, and he was about to pull the trigger before he was disrupted by Dr. Boring himself coming into his office. Dr. Boring saw the men in there and said aloud, "Hey, what are you men doing in here?" Then Foster orders the zombie to attack Dr. Boring. Dr. Boring looked in terror as the zombie quickly walked over towards him and began to wring his neck. Once Dr. Boring was dead, Foster finally shot the safe open with the neutron gun. Then Foster grabs the box of radium, and then he says to the guys, "Alright, fellas, let's go." And they leave the office. Then Foster gives the box to one of the men and says, "Take my car and take this back to Dr. Daka right away." And Foster gives the man the keys to his car. The man nods his head in acknowledgement and runs downstairs, while Foster says to the rest of the men, "We need to cover our tracks. Let's start a fire in here." And after Foster said that, suddenly they heard a loud crash of glass breaking. The men looked down the hall where the sound came from, and Foster saw that it was Batman and Robin that swung in through the window at the end of the hallway. And then Foster screams, "Oh, great! Just what we need." And then he says to the men, "Come on, let's get to the roof." And Foster and his men quickly run towards the stairwell and take the stairwell up to the roof. Batman and Robin gave chase. Foster and his men got to the roof first, and he told the guys to scatter about. Foster waited with the neutron gun pointing to the door to the roof access, waiting for the dynamic duo to come across. Soon enough, the door flies wide open and Batman and Robin emerge. He pulls the trigger, but Batman and Robin quickly leap out the way, and the neutron gun hits the closing roof door and it explodes. Foster turns to look for the dynamic duo, and he sees that they have taken refuge behind an old chimney. He uses the neutron gun and blasts the chimney. After the explosion and smoke cleared, there was no sign of Batman and Robin. Suddenly, Batman leaps on top of Foster and disarms him. And then him and Robin proceed to beat up Foster. As they were doing that, the rest of Foster's men join in and a huge brawl broke out on the roof. In the middle of the fight, Foster shouted for the zombie to go after Batman, and the zombie did. And Batman laid in a few punches and kicks, but the zombie was not fazed. It did not feel pain. And sure enough, it landed a few hits on Batman, knocking him back. Batman went back at the zombie with everything he had, and nothing. He was unfazed. Finally, he grabbed Batman by the throat and began wringing his neck. Batman was trying everything to break himself free from the zombie's choking grip, but it was not working. Robin sees it and quickly breaks away from the fight and runs over towards the zombie. There he proceeded to land several kidney punches at the zombie. A normal man would have quickly been brought down, but not this zombie. The zombie then loosens his grip on Batman's neck and turns towards Robin and goes after Robin. Well, Batman quickly went and leapt onto the zombie, and he brought the zombie down to the ground and began to wallop on the zombie's face on the ground. The zombie was unfazed and quickly flung Batman off of him. Then he gets up and goes towards Batman again. Finally, Batman gets up, tries to take on the zombie, and the zombie picks up Batman like a rag doll. The zombie holds Batman high over its head with both hands and then flings Batman off the roof. Robin sees it and screams no, and then, running with all his might, shoulder rams the zombie in its back and pushes the zombie off the roof. Well, the zombie fell to its death, and as for Batman, Batman got lucky. He had landed on the hanging scaffolding used for window washing. Then Batman pulls out his grapple gun and grapples back up to the roof. He asked Robin if he was alright, and Robin said yes. Foster had got away with a couple of his men. The remaining group of his men were on the roof unconscious. There, Batman saw the neutron gun on the roof. Foster had left it behind. Batman picks it up and says to Robin,
They left this weird-looking gun behind. Take it down with you to the Batmobile. We will study at the cave. I'm going to make sure Linda Page is all right.
Robin acknowledges and heads down to the Batmobile. Batman then makes his way down to the office and frees Linda Page. He asked her if she was alright. She said yes. And then Linda was saddened when she saw the lifeless body of Dr. Boring on the floor. And then Batman had asked her what they had taken from the safe. And Linda went to look real quick in the safe. And then she says to Batman, they took a box of radium. We used this for our research. Then when she turns around, Batman was gone. She didn't think nothing of it, and then quickly went over to the desk and called the police. The police came and did their thing, and then Bruce Wayne comes up to the office, and the police stopped him, and Linda said, it's okay, he's my boyfriend. And the police officer says, well, I'm sorry, Miss Page, this is an active crime scene, he's not allowed in here. And then Bruce says, I'll wait out in the hallway. And Linda walks out to the hallway to join Bruce. Where there, she begins to tell Bruce everything that happened while she was sobbing. And Bruce says to Linda, oh, thank God you're alright, Linda. I'll take you home as soon as the police say it's okay. And then a detective walks up to both of them, and he says, yes, Miss Page, you're free to go. There's nothing more we need of you tonight, he says. But don't head out of town for the next couple of days, just in case we need to ask more questions. Linda says okay, and then her and Bruce walk off. As they were walking towards the elevator, Bruce asks Linda, so do you want to stay at my place tonight? And Linda says, no, I'll be fine over at my place, Bruce, but thank you. And then Bruce smiles and puts his arm around Linda. And then he asks her, you want a bite to eat? And she looks at Bruce and lets out a slight smile, and she says, yeah, I could use a bite to eat. And then the elevator door opens up and the two step in. Like and subscribe, the end.